Wings of Fire, A Guide to the Dragon World by Tui T. Sutherland, is a lushly illustrated small coffee table book designed for fans of the Wings of Fire series. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Ahead, I'll talk with Tui about the Wings of Fire series, her inspirations, and this latest book. I requested and was provided with a copy of the book, but this video is not sponsored. Now, for those who are fans of the series, she needs no introduction, but I'll give you one anyway. Tui T. Sutherland is the author of the New York Times and USAToday bestselling Wings of Fire series, the Menagerie trilogy, and the Pet Trouble series. She joins us to talk about Wings of Fire, A Guide to the Dragon World. Tui, welcome to the Kids Bookshelf.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, before we talk about the book itself, for those who might not be familiar with the series, tell us about it.
Sure. Well, Wings of Fire is a series that tells this big epic fantasy adventure from the point of view of dragons. So it's a world ruled by dragons. There's 10 different kinds of dragons in this world. There's all these kingdoms. Some of them are at war at the beginning of the series. And the series sort of follows, like, each book is about a different dragon wrestling with either a prophecy or some powers that they have and finding a way to, save the world, make the world a better place, no matter what kind of sort of personality that dragon has.
And then you have the humans, which they don't really recognize as anything more than just animals.
Right, exactly. That's what I was going for, because most of the stories that I'd read about dragons were from a human point of view, describing the dragons sort of from the outside as either like monsters or, something that they wanted to tame or control in some way. And I always thought, well, what do the dragons think of that? Like, what if we had the dragon side of the story? What would they think about these humans that show up and try to steal their treasure or tame them? I'm sure they wouldn't like that very much. So that's definitely at the beginning of the series. The dragons see the humans as annoying little squirrels, and the humans see the dragons as these giant flying sharks that are terrifying. But as you go through the series, some of the dragons and some of the humans actually start to find ways to communicate with each other. And that's one of the arcs that I'm really interested in, is getting to understand somebody that you maybe didn't even think you could understand from the beginning to the end.
And for what age group are the books intended?
Sort of the best age group is for starting the series is somewhere between 8 to 13. But I find kids at my events of all ages. I get them as young as 7 that are reading the graphic novels, and all the way up to kids in their 20s who have been reading the books since they first started, which I love. I love meeting those readers that are like, well, I'm still going to come back because I want to know what happens. So my hope is that because the dragons don't have a very specific age, it doesn't match up with the human age, that anyone reading it can see themselves in the dragons, no matter what age they are.
And what do you think it is about this series that appeals to your readers?
Well, I hope it's a few things. I try to make it funny. I try to make it exciting. I know there's a lot of kids who just love dragons. I was one of those kids. If it had a dragon on the cover, I'd get excited about it. But I also hope that it's the characters, because I spend the most time on figuring out what each of those dragons' characters is like, what their history and their family, and why they are the way they are. And so my hope is that the kids reading it, maybe who will pick it up thinking oh, exciting dragon adventure, will also find a story about, becoming coming out of your shell and meeting new dragons and doing something brave, or about there's each dragon has a different arc that they have to go through. And so I'm hoping the kids will see themselves in these dragons and find them relatable, even though they're gigantic and have scales and can fly.
Well, let's talk about this latest book, this Guide to the Dragon World, and explain how it's organized and what readers are going to find here.
Sure. This is a book that kids have been asking for a while, actually. They wanted a sort of encyclopedia of the world. And I felt like I couldn't write this one until I got to the end of book 15, where you finally met all of the 10 tribes and been to all the different parts of the continents. There's 2 continents in this world. And so now I could be all right, now you get to meet all of them. Each chapter is about a different tribe, and it tells you a little bit about sort of their geography and their history, and answers some of the questions that kids have had all along about like things that have been referenced in the books but never fully explained. And it's also full of like beautiful art. Our artist Joy Ang has been doing the covers since the beginning, and she did a bunch of new art for this book. So as you flip through it, it's just all these like beautiful portraits of different queens and beautiful illustrations of different parts of the dragon world. So my hope is it's for kids who just want to like dive a little further into the series, and maybe also those kids who like to write their own stories. It'll hopefully give them some inspiration and some of the details that they really need to do that.
So you go through and you profile all the different kinds of dragons that are in your books, and maps and pleasant surprises in there. There was sheet music for some songs and at least one recipe that I found.
Yes, exactly. The song was really fun because there's a young dragon that you meet in book 8 who is the kind of dragon. He was based on one of my kids who was 3 at the time and was constantly like making up his own songs and performing all over the house. And I was like, okay, I need to have a baby dragon like this. And so I wrote this little character. And so as we were writing this, I thought, well, if the idea is that each tribe is sending in something that they've created or something that they want to be in this guide, the queen of this world, of this particular tribe, the Skywings, would definitely send something her kid wrote, because that's what I would do. And so she's like, look, he's written this new anthem. Isn't it wonderful? And it was really fun because I wrote the lyrics and then my husband wrote the sheet music, and we got to work on it together. And then actually for the audiobook, one of my kids sings it. So it was like a family project.
So for fans of this series, this kind of brings it all together. But how about someone who's not familiar with the series? Could this also serve as an introduction to the whole Dragon World series?
I think so. If they're like interested in just understanding all the different tribes. In fact, at the beginning of each novel, there's kind of a mini guide to the dragons that just lists like, this is the Skywings. Here's what they look like. Here's where they live and who their queen is. So this is sort of an expanded version of that, where it's like, here are like a lot more details about that tribe. And so I think kids who have read the books will get more out of it, because they'll be like, oh, that's Starflight, that's Fate Speaker, that's Kinkajou. I know those characters. But I think for someone who just is curious about what the whole world looks like, they could definitely pick this up and just flip through it and think like, oh, okay. So if I go read the books, now I know a little bit more about each of these characters and each of these like worlds.
Well, this has become such a long series. I'm curious sort of about the logistics of keeping all the details straight. You've got all these different tribes, you've got maps, you've got history. How do you keep it all straight?
I have a lot of like Word documents just organized on my desktop. It's a little messy, but I also just think about it all the time. You know, I feel so immersed in this world that a lot of it just is still there in my head. I will say sometimes I go to events and kids will ask very specific questions, and I'm like, oh gosh, I would have to go back and check my notes in order to answer that. But I do have something that I call notes for each book. There's like book 1 notes, book 2 notes, and those are where I just put everything that I'm like, okay, don't forget about this. Make sure that you answer this question somewhere in here. It is a little bit of a lot to keep track of.
Now, all of your dragons have different names with the term wings connected to it. And I understand that your fan group is called FanWings. Tell us a bit about them and what your interaction has been with those folks.
Oh, sure. They're the most wonderful people. They started calling themselves FanWings early on these forums where they would talk to each other. And I thought that was just the coolest thing. I love them so much. And my favorite thing actually is when I get to go to events and they'll come to meet me and I get to talk to them a little bit about the stories that they're writing, or they'll show me the art that they've done of their own like original characters or of my characters in different styles. I just think they're so creative, all of these kids. And it's sort of awe-inspiring to realize that they're also immersed in this world in their own like super imaginative way. And it really gives me hope for the future, because I'm like, if there are kids, like all these kids show up to an event to talk to an author, and because they've read like 15 dragon books, like these kids are awesome. We're going to be okay. I really just love them.
I'm sure they're waiting for the next one. So what word do you have about continuing this series? I
can say, yes, we are definitely going to continue the series. I have ideas for book 16 and where the dragons can go next. I'm just trying to focus on which one is going to be like the main character of book 16. So I don't know that yet. But I can say the 7th graphic novel is coming really soon. That's going to be out right after Christmas. And we're working on the 8th graphic novel. So hopefully that will tide people over a little bit until we get to a brand new book in the novel series. But it will be coming eventually.
Well, I'll talk just a little bit more about this current book. I found it interesting that, sort of the different personalities of the dragons show up as you read through this book. And I don't remember which wing it was, but there was one where like they'd written a title to it and someone had scratched that out and said, no, let's put it this way. It's like, yeah, I understand that you are proud of it, but maybe that was over the top.
Well, right, exactly. The whole idea that as I started working on this was I thought to myself, well, who is making this guide? Can it be sort of a character in the world? And one of them is a librarian at this school for dragons. And I love librarians. I think that they are like what holds society together and like makes kids into wonderful humans. And so I was like, well, what if this librarian has decided, most of the books that had been written, like that you'd seen throughout the series, were written by like 2 particular tribes, like the Nightwings and the Seawings. And so they had their own perspective on the other tribes that wasn't as in-depth as what you would get by talking to those tribes themselves. And so this book begins with that librarian finding a book in his library that's all about the Mudwings. But one of his Mudwing students has gone in and written on it and said, like, no, this is not what we're like at all. This is what Nightwings think we're like, but we're actually like this, and this is not true, and this is not true. And so as a librarian, he's like, you can't write in books. What are you doing? But then he says, you know what? You're right, though. Like, we need your version of the story. We need to hear your voice in order to really understand what it's like. And that's what sets him off creating this guide, because he's like, okay, now I'm going to go get Mudwing versions of their story and have the Rainwings tell their own story, get some of the Icewing books that nobody else has gotten to read. And so hopefully over the course of the book, like, this librarian character is pulling together enough of the voices that you get a really like deeper understanding of every kind of dragon in this world.
I'm wondering, in addition to just being an engaging series and story, is there also some takeaway here in terms of, like you said, making sure that you really understand as opposed to just making assumptions about people, or in this case, dragons, but also the assumptions about people? It seems like with kind of this reversal, it's like if you relate it to our world, we make assumptions about animals and what they're capable of understanding and feeling. Is that part of also the message in this book, or is this series?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that the number one quality that you get from reading a book is empathy. That's something I've always felt as a writer. And one of the things I love is reading a story and then reading that same story from a different character's point of view and getting to see what was really going on with them from the inside after you've seen them from the outside. And that's one of the reasons that for the Wings of Fire series, like the perspective shifts in each book. There's, it's a different character telling the story. So you've met Sunny in book 1, but you don't realize what Sunny is feeling about everything until you get her side of the story in book 5. And so that's on a bigger scale what's happening in this book. It's not individual characters, it's entire tribes that have been read a certain way by other tribes. And so the idea is like, no, now you get to see them as like more complete and more, what they're really feeling on the inside. I do feel like that's what books are for. And I'm hoping that like kids will feel that too. Like I could tell my story and then people will understand me. I think that's really definitely what I'm going for.
The book is Wings of Fire, A Guide to the Dragon World by Tui Sutherland. Tui, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you so much. This was really fun. I appreciate it.
If you'd like to purchase Wings of Fire, A Guide to the Dragon World, I've placed a link for you in the description below. Thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. And if you'd like to see more videos about children's books and their authors, be sure to like, subscribe, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.